Welcome back to another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm your host, Stephen Roy Goodman. I'm at LCC International University in Klaipeda, Lithuania, where we're going to be speaking about how students and universities navigate war zones and protracted conflicts. And I've got three guests with me today. I've got Naomi DeBoer, who is a counselor at the university and an independent private therapist, Ivan Kovtoniuk, who's a student from Ukraine, and Giedre Norman, who's an assistant professor of international relations. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming. Naomi, maybe if we could start with you. You see students individually. So what does that mean exactly? What are students talking to you about generally without sharing names?
Yes, so we have students that are coming from many different areas all over the world. And so, most students initially might come in for general issues regarding relational conflict or having difficulty with anxiety or depression. It might start, very light in the beginning, and then as time goes on, I come to see the impacts of having come from a war-torn area, and essentially what that would do to a student, it would cause an increased sense of stress, an increased sense of being out of their window of tolerance. And so they may not have as high of a tolerance for enduring like normal stressful situations. And so often the work that I do with students is helping to give them emotional regulation skills, helping to give them more awareness around ways that they can ground and find mindfulness and be in the present moment in the midst of everything that they're carrying. Because of course, their minds are on home, their minds are on their families, their minds are, feeling a sense of survivor's guilt for being the one who gets to be out of the war conflict. They get to be in a place of peace. And so there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of a sense of, I should also be suffering along with my family members. And so what I want to do is give them a sense of, okay, in the present moment, how can you be where you are? How can you have a sense of purposefulness where you are? And essentially, like, they have so much that they need to focus on right now so that they can give back to their community, so that they can return one day to their home country to give back and build after the war has finished. And that gives a sense of purpose and vision moving forward.
Well, let's move forward if we can, and to the moment. Ivan, I'm sure what you just heard a second ago is describing your situation. You're from Ukraine. Your parents are back in Ukraine. Can you say a word or two about what you're going through and why you came here and what you're going through?
Well, thank you for the question. I've been here for 4 years, so I came here in 2021 when the war has not started yet, at least not the full-scale war. But my freshman year, the war has started, and ever since then, I haven't been able to go back home. That has been one of the most difficult challenges of this war period for me. My parents are back home, as you said, and they're not currently fighting in the war, but they are in the area that experiences heavy bombing, and there's air sirens everywhere, so life there is not normal in any sense. And just as Naomi said, sometimes I do feel guilt. I cannot feel in the present moment sometimes because it seems like to me that I have abandoned my family and that I am experiencing all of these great things here in Lithuania while all of them back there cannot live their normal life. So this has been probably one of the most difficult experiences for me, but I am trying to kind of focus on the present and try to do as many things as I can to kind of take my mind off of things. But of course, sometimes I just can't pull through with that.
And if you don't mind me asking, this might be a little too personal for a television set, but what do you do? Do you play basketball? Do you listen to music?
Well, I am heavily involved in the student life at university. I am a member of the student council, and I've been for the past 3 years now. I also volunteer. I also work with the Center for Dialogue and Conflict Transformation, and I try to do my part in peace building within our community, because I believe that if we start over here, I think that is a big start for something bigger and broader in the future.
Well, fair enough. And Giedre, if I could ask, as a professor here, no doubt you have students in your classes who come from all sorts of war zones and conflict zones around the world. How do you navigate that as a professor?
Yeah, so the students in the classroom come from areas of conflict, areas of war, or simply countries that have social political turmoil, and they bring that situation into the classroom. We have to be gracious with attendance policy sometimes. Sometimes we have to simply recognize that a student is not in a good place while an exam is coming up. Sometimes we have to think what content is appropriate for a classroom, and based on what happened yesterday in their country, maybe even adjust how the class will go so that the student is not ignored or pushed to the side, but acknowledged. And the whole group has to be aware of who is in the class instead of, the class continues as if nothing has happened. So, so in my class, my teaching had to be adjusted to students from Ukraine. My teaching had to be adjusted to keeping in mind there are students from Iraq, Yazidi students, or students whose families just fled Afghanistan. You have to be very aware of who is in the class and with whom you're working.
And what if students in the class come from different sides of a conflict?
And they do. We aim to have a lot of discussions in the class and create a very safe space to discuss different perspectives without animosity. Sometimes we read a case that has nothing to do with the two sensitive sides, but it is a very external case. And it makes them reflect in an indirect way about their own situation. When students work in groups, they build connections with someone who is from the other side. So it's a way of connecting and seeing a different relationship that is possible with another student. So some students would tell me examples how for the first time in their life they worked with someone from a certain identity group and how transformational it was.
Fair enough. And maybe if I can throw this next question to you, Yvonne. So let's talk about those communications. You're of a different generation than the other people on this set here. What about the issue of sharing those discussions in social media and publicly? We just heard about students who are in part of a university class discussion, and maybe it's the first time that you're talking to somebody from the quote-unquote other side. But what happens if somebody posts a photo or says, yes, I met with such and such person, or here we were discussing this? And now all of a sudden, it's not just a one-on-one discussion. Now it goes to the wider world.
Well, I would see how that would be not the best experience for the student, especially putting like discussions like these, which are meant to be personal on the internet, which do not really need to face the limelight. Let's just say that. But I believe that even if that kind of discussions are showcased on the internet, and the students are aware of that, this can show to other people that dialogue between people of different identities, of even war-torn countries that are currently at war, is possible. And I myself have a lot of friends that come from Belarus and Russia too. And what I try to do is I try to separate them from their government. I don't believe that all of the people should be separated from their government, especially if that government is democratically elected. But the people that come here, they are interested in building peace, and they are interested in building friendships, and I acknowledge that. And I believe that you can build a positive relationship with someone who is from a country that is even bombing your country or is in an awful relationship with your country. And while people from back home may not appreciate these kind of relationships, and even if they are posted on the internet, I still believe that it is important to showcase these kind of relationships, these kind of discussions, because it shows that the peace can be built, and it can start small, and then it can grow larger and larger. And maybe these kind of discussions are a key to building peace.
Well, that's a terrific point. Have you gotten any pushback from anyone back home about those relationships that you've built with students from Belarus or Russia?
At first, when the war first started, I did have a couple of friends from Russia and Belarus, and I would say that my parents were not really supportive of those relationships that I had with those people. But an interesting case was this summer when my mom came to Klaipeda, Lithuania, and she met with my friend who was from Belarus. And she actually enjoyed speaking with her so much that she said she is such an amazing girl. She is like an incredible person. And meeting her here, she realized how, I guess, presumptive she was of her because of where she comes from. And I think that meeting those people and building those connections and even showcasing that can show that people from different countries, people at the warring countries, people whose governments are currently inflicting war on other countries, they can be different. They can be good. They can be incredible people. You just have to get to know them. And sometimes you have to put all of your assumptions and all of the anger and everything aside and just to get to know the person.
Well, Naomi, I don't think you need a job anymore. You can just have Ivan work with the
It's
students.
true. He's one of our most resilient students, I would say. I mean, the way that Ivan has gotten involved from the beginning is a real example to many students that we have. He has shown that if you can be involved and have a sense of empowerment, have a sense of being in control of something and give back to the community in some way, it's a real example to many people that gives a sense of hope.
But I suspect that that's probably a minority position, that a lot of students don't have that sophistication. Is there a way to teach that or counsel students to move in that direction?
Absolutely. I mean, I think all behavior is something that we need to learn, right? It's modeled to us. We mirror one another. And so as we observe, as we grow in self-awareness, as we see other people taking on behaviors, we will also follow in those footsteps. And so I think initially what I do with students is just help to bring that initial self-awareness. What's going on the inside? How do I name what I'm experiencing? And once you name it, then you can tame it, so to speak. And then you can actually have control and power over what you're experiencing and not be controlled by those emotions. And so I think that little by little, as you gain a sense of self-control, you can move into a place where you're beyond being controlled by those trauma responses or reactivity. Those things are just body reactions or brain responses, but they are not the whole of who we are.
And you use the word trauma. That might have a meaning for some people and a different meaning for somebody else. How do you deal with people who might have slightly different definitions of the same word?
Yes, I mean, that's very common. And I think trauma, even in the counseling or psychotherapy world, is very broad. And so I think trauma is something that it's more about a personal reaction that we're having inside of our brain. When we feel a sense of threat, when we feel a sense of something might harm me, our body and our brain will respond in the same way, even if it's not a true threat. And so, for example, even when we vicariously witness something, maybe on social media or maybe in the news, our bodies might experience watching what's happening on the news as though it's happening to us, even though we're not going through it personally. We have such a strong empathetic response to what we see. And so part of what I might help someone do is essentially understand the brain response, first of all. This is what's going on in your brain. Your brain is not fully integrated in that moment when you're having a trauma response. And these are some ways that you can help your brain to become more integrated through mindfulness, through grounding, through getting back into your body, some embodiment practices. And then once you feel grounded again, you're able to think more rationally and more clearly and have a more integrated response. And that's the same for all of us. It's a very universal thing.
Well, and speaking of the universality of this, Giedre, in a classroom setting, as Naomi just described a second ago, it's a one-on-one situation. But in a classroom, it seems like it would be a little more difficult to deal with that, especially if students are dealing with seeing an image on television or something that might be painful in some way. How do you deal with that in the moment? You referenced something that just happened yesterday. There's going to be something that happens tomorrow and the day before and the day after that. How do you deal with that in a classroom situation?
Thank you. And that situation you described affects not only students, it affects teachers as well. So, yeah, we have to find how to deal with that. I remember when Mariupol building was bombed in Ukraine, and I was traumatized vicariously, tremendously, and I had to teach a class. And teaching seemed such a irrelevant activity given the situation that is happening right now somewhere else. We have to take pauses sometimes. We have to allow crying in the classroom sometimes. Encourage people to take care of themselves. Maybe reduce the coursework at that time because there are people who cannot cope with that at the time, right? So we learned, I think in the last 2 years especially, that teaching is not a detached activity from what happens in the real world, but very much affected by that in terms of the pace of teaching, the content of teaching, the types of assignments even. About a year ago, I added a new assignment in my class. Instead of a long paper, I added a photo voice project. And this is, it's based on this research type of photo voice. I adapted it. And each student could take 2 pictures during the semester that have any association with peace, conflict, peace building, and create a final project like a presentation. So the first slide is 2 photos and a caption of some kind of theme that resonates with them. So I allowed in this project students to go into themselves and to explore what matters to them. And what surprised me is that students who were not even from Ukraine, for example, chose subjects that are related to war. One student had a picture of students singing in a choir in the darkness, so they were holding lights. And another picture is people hiding in a shelter in Ukraine in the dark. And the name of the slide was Darkness Can Be a Choice or It Cannot Be a Choice. So all of a sudden, because of the war, we recognize that the light or darkness have a very different meaning. It's not the same meaning anymore, right? So, so universities with their attendance policies, content, types of classes, events after the classroom have to be always reacting to what is going on to other countries around where their students are coming from.
And how about interacting with faculty members from other countries? Many faculty members go to all these international conferences, but it seems to me that being at a place like LCC or another university in Lithuania, you might be dealing with all sorts of issues that are quite different from somebody from Belgium or Canada.
Yeah, people living in this area of the world, of course, are affected by Ukrainian war differently. So there is a lot of resonance in Lithuania. And if you travel across the country, you'll see more Ukrainian flags than Lithuanian flags because of our vicarious identification with Ukraine, which we see as fighting for its independence and national self-determination, which Lithuania has gained 30 years ago, and it kind of left that influence zone. But the influence zone indirectly still is there. So, so Lithuanians in the last 2 years donated 44 million euros to Ukraine. And you have to keep in mind that we have 2.8 million population. So for Lithuania, it's an indirect struggle of our own, and that may cause some ideological divisions in the country of people who see the war differently. So it has become a contentious topic in some ways.
And dealing with that contentious topic, Naomi, if we can go back to the individual. If an individual is coming and raising something that's contentious and you personally disagree with that, how do you navigate that as a counselor?
I mean, I set my biases aside when I enter the counseling room with someone. And so I may disagree with where someone stands. And in the moment, I will let them express, whatever emotion they have around a particular topic and acknowledge, where they're coming from in their situation. I think, get into their shoes for a moment and understand that based on their upbringing, based on their surroundings, their family values, this is what they believe. And if there comes a time where it starts to get into the territory of harming an individual or harming people within the university, that's where I draw the line. And that's where I would step in and say something more directly to that individual, that this is not appropriate. This is not to the benefit of the people around you or to the university as a whole. And that's where the line gets drawn. But to be honest, I have not encountered that. It's been very, very rare in our setting. We've had the gift of, as Yvonne named, students who are wanting to build peace, students who come here because they desire something greater for their country.
And Yvonne, in terms of desiring peace, I really think instead of going off to graduate school, you should think about going into counseling with your colleague here, because you're excellent at this. Because it seems to me, from where I'm sitting, that you're actually doing exactly what a lot of therapists are saying people ought to do in terms of reaching out to the other.
Yeah, and that has been a big part of me dealing with the war happening in my country. I am incredibly grateful for the community here at LCC and what they have given to me throughout these years. They allowed me to be active, they allowed me to take my mind off of things, and they allowed me to see that people are not just based on, like, you cannot judge people based on where they come from. People are so multifaceted that you have to get to know somebody in order to truly know them. And to get involved here at LCC has been one of the greatest things that happened to me, to be in student council, to help people and to try to build peace on the margins, to just then basically expand it to the rest of the world. And that has really helped me to kind of sometimes be present in the moment and take my mind off what is happening, but kind of still work towards something that's going to help people from back home.
Do you mind if we talk a little bit about how you do that exactly? So the example you used before about when your mom came and there was a young woman from Belarus, how do you counsel other students? And I realize you're a student yourself, but how do you talk to other students and say, well, you know, it's hard to do this, but there's a value in doing it? How do you get them excited and or motivated? I'm not sure what the right word is. Maybe it's excited, maybe it's motivated, maybe it's interested in reaching out to the other.
I believe that you just do it. Sometimes you can do it by showing an example. And a lot of people from Ukraine, and I think that, as Naomi said, the university has been very blessed with the kind of people that decide to apply to LCC. And a lot of people that come from these regions, they are not set on hurting other people or being very presumptive of other people that come from countries that may be even in conflict with their own country. And I think by showing an example and letting people see that a person from Ukraine and a person from Belarus can be great friends, a person from Ukraine and a person from Russia can be best friends. And just showing that reaching out to other people, getting to know them, being in conversation with them, being in activities with them, volunteering for the Peace Center together, it is possible. And it is work that basically is very important and is very transforming for all the individuals involved. And this concept of transformation and going through this war-affected mentality towards something that is peace-giving and peace-building, I think it is what this university is specifically great about.
If you would like additional information about LCC, please go to lcc.lt. If you would like to send a note to me at the show, please go ahead and do so by sending an email to highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. And thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. I'm Stephen Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.